Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. It's time to go through some planned BR changes for October 2024 for War Thunder. Gaijin have put out an article on their forums, so we're going to have a look at it. In this video, we'll specifically look at the ground forces part, and in a later video, we'll have a look at aviation and also naval. They'll both be out today, so you won't have to wait too long for them. The main thrust of these BR changes is specifically BR decompression for ground. So that's what we're going to be focusing on in this video. I'll try and match footage to what I'm talking about, but understand this affects everything from around about 11.7 at the moment, all the way down to 9.7. That's the major area that's being affected. There are certain other vehicles that are being specifically affected at lower BRs, but we'll focus on that area of BR decompression. There's also some vehicles which are getting buffs, including reload rates and additional shells added, so give some thoughts about that too. Anyway, let's get into it. If you enjoy the content, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. So the main thrust of these changes is simple. It is to decompress the high echelons of ground. Now remember, this is the first stage in the decompression, so if there is stuff that you want changed or want shifted, make sure to let Gaijin know on the forums. And also understand that this is not the only time where, decompression will happen. You usually get this stage, which is the first part where they decompress the high tiers, and then they decompress the mid tiers, and then the low tiers after. So that's happened 2 or 3 or 4 times in a row, and this is just the most recent one of those. In this decompression, what they've done is taken a lot of 11.7 vehicles and put them to 12.0. Every single MBT, or pretty much every single MBT, between the area of 11.7 and 10.3 has been increased in BR by 1 bracket, meaning that, for example, stuff like the Leopard 2A4 has gone from 10.3 to 10.7, stuff like the 120S M60 has gone from 10.0 to 10.3, so it looks like just a blanket increase in BR for everything, which means that stuff like the Leopard 2A5, for example, are still at the same BR as the Leopard 2A7, which doesn't make a lot of sense, since the Leopard 2A7 V and also the Leopard 2A7 HU are fundamentally better than the 2A5 in every single way, but they stay at the same BR. The whole point of BR decompression is so you can start actually moving these vehicles at different BRs, but that's not what we're seeing with this. Instead, what we're seeing is pressure being relieved from the 8.0 to 9.0 area. There is a lot of vehicles which are moving up from that 10.0, 10.3 spot, which is a definite problem spot, by the way, where all those premiums are, such as the 2A4, the Challenger DS, obviously the 2S38, and things like the BMP-2M Squadron vehicle and the UD. All of these vehicles are moving up to release pressure from 9.0, 8.7, and 9.3, so therefore it can actually start feeling itself as a BR instead of it just getting hammered by the higher echelons. As somebody who's recently been playing the T72, the M1 specifically for Germany, I felt the full force of the STRV-121, the M1 KVT, stuff like this just hammering me in the face over and over again, and it's nice to see that this will hopefully get decompressed out, so therefore 8.7, 8.3, and 8.0, and 9.0, and 9.3 can start actually playing their own areas. And what these changes do specifically is they actually change the 8.0 to 9.0 area, right? From 9.0 upwards, the area has been decompressed, so therefore you'll see different vehicles around the place, but 8.0 to 9.0 is the area which will become more interesting and volatile because so many vehicles have been moved out of its bracket. With 10.0 being changed and 10.3 being changed to 10.3 and 10.7, that means a lot more 9.0, 9.3 vehicles can become alive. This affects the matchmaking of 8.7 and 8.3 and might actually relieve some pressure off the 8.0 area, which is not exactly in a great place because it still has that problem in ground where it's transitioning from non-stabilized vehicles to stabilized vehicles, and also the Heat FS meta to the APFS DS meta. So this doesn't necessarily help the top tiers, like I've talked about with the Leopards and even the Leclercs all being the same BRs, and obviously the Abramses and everything. but what it does do is it releases pressure from that 8.0 to 9.0 area. So that is the interesting point to have a look at. They have also realized that certain vehicles at the highest echelon are not doing as well as others. So, for example, the Merkavas, the Mark 4M, the Lick, the 4B as well, are all getting a reload buff. Their reload time is going to be reduced to 5 seconds. So now their reloads are exactly the same as the Abrams. The Arietes are also getting the same buff. They are all getting increased in BR, by the way, so they're just following the pattern of the MBTs and the light tanks. So they're all getting put up to 12.0 and 11.7, whether they should be or not, especially something like the standard Ariete, or the Ariete being the Ariete PSO being 11.7 is kind of ludicrous, but they are getting the 5-second reload to try and balance them out. And the Leopard 2PL, the squadron vehicle Leopard for Germany, is getting access to the DM33 shell, and this will mean that it is now more equal to stuff like the Leopard 2A5, for example, but even still being a lower BR at 11.7. Most of its matchmaking will be the same, though, because you'll see high tier quite a lot. So overall, quite a lot of buffs to vehicles which are underperforming, including the Mercs and the Arietes. The Arietes have been buffed several times now. The Abramses have been buffed several times, and so have the other vehicles, including the Merkavas, kind of try and bring them in line with all of the other MBTs. Whether that's going to happen or not, we'll have to see. The M1A1s are also getting buffed, so the M1A1 HC and also the Clickbait, so this is the premium version and the standard version. Both of these are getting the M829A2 shell. This is the same as the M1A2 shell that's in the game, so those are going to be a lot better. They already have the M829A1 shell, but the A2 is better than it, so trying to balance them out once again. Another Abrams buff just to help that area. The Abrams and the HSTVL and all of these vehicles are really not, doing too good at the moment. When I played the HSTVL recently, it was just like watching a red wave just annihilate my teams over and over again. One of the things that I think should be focused on, though, with these changes is obviously the BR decompression helping out 8.0 to 9.0, but the main thing is this is massively just focusing on MBTs and light tanks. So there doesn't seem to be hardly any AAs in the decompression list. They have just been left to their own devices. So there's no Panzer, there's no Florakrad, there's no ADATs, there's nothing like that. Instead, it's just the MBTs and the light tanks. So whether this is something where they've just forgotten about them or are going to update the BR changes and put them in, or is it the fact that CAS is incredibly powerful at these BRs, and it's proven to be so with all of these AAs not going up in BR, so they still have to deal with the CAS elements. I would actually go towards the second thought of it, but at the same time, the fact that there's a very limited amount of vehicles which have been, moved around with AAs. Usually you would want to see a little bit more if that was the case, so that just seems a little bit odd to me. The Chaparral, though, the improved one and the standard one, is going down in BR, so those ones have not been doing well at all. One of the Chaparrals is going from 10.3 to 10.0, and the other one is going from 9.3 to 9.0. So that kind of shows the state of those vehicles, which is very negative. They've had to buff them and still lower them in BR, which just shows the problem that these vehicles have. They are no good at what they need to do, and so hopefully this helps them out. The LOSAT is also moving down in BR, one of the only ones around the 10.0 area that's moving down, and that's also because it's just not very good. The vehicle has fundamental problems, and I remember when it was being added to the game, there was a lot of hype around it because of, oh look, missile high penetration. But, as usual in War Thunder, there are much more important things than one singular statistic on a vehicle. And the problem with the LOSAT is it did not fire on the move, and still does not. Its actual launch pattern is horrific if you're at an angle, And also, even though the missile is really quick, you have to be stationary while guiding it in, while another tank such as an MBT doesn't. So it just looks at you, bangs, and then moves back. It's the typical 80 gem problem. And also another thing that we see in the area of this set of Plan BR changes is really no SPG changes either. So stuff like the Chrysanthema, for example, and other vehicles just haven't been touched. So it's very much light tank and MBT focused. Talking about some other vehicles that also got buffs, with the Roycat MTTD getting increased to 9.3 and the OF40 MTCA being increased to 9.32, both of them are getting the DM33 shell. So this is to deal with the TEM3 up tiers that they will be seeing. Hopefully, in general, they'll be fine with that though. They're two pretty good vehicles, highly mobile, and generally are fun. With regard to the other changes that they've made for ground, the first one is the XM800T. They've actually put it up to 8.0 from 7.7. I don't see any reason to kind of disagree with this change. The only issue with the XM800T is you need to get that round in order to actually get it up to that standard, and that's the problem with the vehicle. If you don't have the DM63 round on the vehicle, it's not very good. You have to use it as a very light vehicle, which, is basically just an SPAA, but once you get that round, it's very, very good, and easily the best light tank at 7.7. I would take it over a lot of BMPs, stuff like the DF105 as well. It can really wreck house with that stabilizer that doesn't ever seem to become unbalanced once you move around the place. No matter what speed you're running at, that stabilizer is incredibly powerful. And it just kind of sucks with the XM800T. They could have actually solved the American AA issue if they just made this thing a mid-tier vehicle, which was an AA, and didn't give it DM63. But instead now, it's going to be very annoying to fight forever because of this need to give it that APDS round. The Hovet and the M163 are also moving down. No surprise here. It's these two vehicles, which are carbon copies of each other, by the way. The Hovet is just the Israeli M163. The problem these vehicles have is their targeting radar is very, very rough. And at the same time, you can only really engage targets when they're close to you, and with a lot of the overpressure changes, and also just, let's be honest, a bunch of the munitions that they've added to the game, since they are open top, you have to, and because of the minigun, you have to wait until about 1.5 to 2 kilometers in order to engage somebody, and by then they could have just dropped a bomb miles away from you, but it'll just overpressure you anyway. They're in a really tough position, those ones, and it just sucks. The same with the ZSL92. This is the first AA which at mid-tier has gone down in BR, even though it has a high muzzle velocity, high rate of fire gun. Every other one has gone up, including the AMX-10P, which is going up to 6.3, because for some reason they decided to give it, once again, DM63. So the ZSL92 is different to a lot of the other AAs, and this is something that I found out recently while playing it. When you have a look at stuff like the BTR-ZD, the M5359, even things like the Ostwind or, vehicles like that, and the R3T20, of course, one of the classics of the time. One thing that they all have in common is they don't just have a high firepower and also really good rate of fire, they also have good targeting speed. And the ZSL92 is not up to snuff yet in terms of its targeting speed. It doesn't have as good rotation around the place as others. So for example, the horizontal on it is 32 degrees, and also it's a very large target, so it can be kind of annoying to get it on target. But if you compare that to something like the ZSD63, which is a little bit lower in BR, it just has a much better flick to the actual vehicles. So overall, I would say the ZSL is in a slightly worse place because of that, and also because they decided to not give it APDS or anything like that, which was a great addition. They should not add ridiculously penning rounds to these AAs. They should just keep them as AAs, and then they can balance them properly. The Leopard 4070 also went up in BR. That's because it's a Leopard chassis with a 40 on it. With the Rapid Fire 40, it's not an AA, it's an AT-10 tank. Like that, I don't know how else to put it. And until it starts facing a lot more of those heavies at 6.7, it's still going to do really, really well. So it's one of those which I'm not surprised has gone up in BR. The KV1M1942 going down, the premium for Sweden, must not have sold very well. It went down to 4.7, which is, to be honest, where it should have been in the first place. Putting it at the same BR as the KV1C from Germany was very confusing, because the KV1C has the long-barreled 75mm, which is one of the reasons why you pick that thing up. It has increased damage and penetration from the gun, whereas the one in the Swedish tech tree, which is the KV1M1942, only has the ZIS-5 cannon. So yeah, it's not a surprise that this one underperformed, and I think everybody I talked to at the time who decided to run with this thing understood that its gun was just kind of worthless at that BR, especially as they've changed a lot of parameters around that BR in terms of other vehicles. The Breda 501 goes up again. I can't praise the Breda 501 enough. No surprise to me that it's increasing. I've said it many times. It's a fantastic vehicle, works really well, and that's just because of the fact it has a really good 90mm gun, which overpressures targets when it pens, because it has enough explosive mass on the gun, so if you penetrate anywhere on a vehicle, it nukes it, and that is why it does so well. It has 347 grams of explosive mass, which is enough to make everybody go pop, and then also you have good penetration, so you can go through most targets that you face. It's also mobile, and since they changed the firing angles on the gun, so the sides don't get in the way, it's just got better and better and better. The other one is the BT7AF32. Kind of surprised to see this go up, but it might just be a continued increase to make it similar to a lot of other event vehicles that have gone up recently, ones which are used during events and used very aggressively, and also for high score matches. The BT7AF32 is a good vehicle, but 4.0 just seems a little bit high for me for it. That's basically putting it at the same BR as the T34, and the thing about the BT7 is you don't really have that much better mobility, but you do have scouting, which helps you out a lot more, I suppose, compared to the armor of the T34. That's probably why it's going up. But yeah, that one's a bit more surprising than what I've seen previously. There are also two balance changes that are coming in without BR changes. So all of the ones that we talked about before are changes, but they are obviously, with BR ones. The Fox, the APDS shell parameters have been recalculated. So we're going to have to see what that means. But my guess is they're probably going to reduce its post-pen effect because of the fact that that round does a lot of post-pen damage compared to what it's supposed to. But as I said, we don't know what the change is yet. We'll have to wait for a data mine. We'll have to see what goes on with it. But just understand that Fox is changing. The other one is the Floracrad. Now, I've talked about this many times. High-tier AAs and their BRs make absolutely no sense. The fact that the Panzer is at 11.7, and the fact that the Floracrad is at 11.7, the fact that the ADATs are at 11.7, the fact that all of these vehicles share the same BR, even though they are wildly different in terms of how useful they are, is nuts. And the Floracrad is just hilarious compared to the Panzer. It gets 2 missiles, and that's it. Where the Panzer has basically an Armageddon's worth of weaponry. So what they're doing with the Floracrad is they are removing its stock missile. So if you didn't know, you start off with the Roland 3, which isn't a great missile at the highest echelon, and you have to research the VT1 modification, which is a rank 2 modification. So you have to struggle until you get parts FPE and then the VT1 missile in order to actually be useful. You have to grind about 20k RP to get it, to try and do your job as an AA in one of the weaker AAs at the highest echelon. So now you don't have to. They're going to give it to you stock, so you won't have to pay to use it, and also you won't have to get the modification. This is a huge buff to the Floracrad, because the VT1 missile is a lot better than the Roland 3, and it means that it brings it in line with stuff like the Ito, for example, where the Ito 90M, which is at the same BR once again, with, let's see, a ridiculous amount of missiles ready to go, had the VT1 stock already. For some reason, the Floracrad didn't, so that kind of sucks for it. It's nice to see the change. It's positive for the Floracrad. Now, what are my general thoughts on these ground changes? They're positive. It's nice to see a good piece of BR decompression. Hopefully it helps out that 8.0 to 9.0 area. I think there's a few vehicles that should go up a little bit more, and a few vehicles that have been forgotten about. I'll make a separate video talking about that. Stuff like the show lifter, of course. I can't believe that thing hasn't moved. The 120S going up in BR with everything else, that is incredibly surprising. But it looks like what they've done right now is just a blanket up tier of everything, which is okay, but it kind of loses the whole point of decompressing BRs if you end up doing that. The fact that stuff like the Challenger 2s are all still the same BR, and the same BR as stuff like the M1A1, for example, and even others, just kind of shows the problems that are about here. But at the same time, it is an overall positive change. Hopefully we get some updated ones with some changes too, and let me know your thoughts. As always, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.
I'd just like to thank GMG Smiley, CD Beans, Chieftain Mike, EMN3 Galaxy, Tulio Pontecorvo, Brendan Quinn, Carrion Crow, Gus Irenicus, Pyman, Wartinder, Teddy, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Ozzy Panzer, Alan Hacker, Liam Shear, Opium Prime, Lafouche, Sem, Aslan, Uncle Bean, and Derek R. for supporting the channel.